I need to read the files first before writing. Now I have everything I need. Let me write the story. The morning I brought the quilt to my daughter-in-law's house, I drove the same way I always drove when I needed to feel close to my husband. Down Ridgecroft, past the old pharmacy where he used to stop for peppermint candies, left on Sycamore where the big oak still had the scar from the ice storm the year we got married. Leonard had been gone 14 months. I still talked to him on long drives. "Big day," I said out loud to no one. "Big day, Lenny." I had the quilt in a box on the passenger seat. Ivory cotton with a border of small red cardinals, because Leonard had loved cardinals, had spent 30 years putting out seed for them behind our house in Mill Haven, Ohio. And in the bottom right corner, stitched so small you'd only see it if you went looking, his initials. LPW. Leonard Philip Wooten. 61 years married, and his initials were the last thing my hands had made before I sat back and said, "That's enough. That's all I've got." I had no idea I was delivering it to a woman who was going to put it on the floor of her closet before I even made it back to my car. Let me start a little before that. My son Arthur is 44 years old. He has his father's forehead and his mother's stubbornness, and the particular quality of wanting everyone in a room to be comfortable that is sometimes a gift and sometimes a curse. He married Simone 11 years ago, a tall, put-together woman from outside Cleveland who sold pharmaceutical real estate or maybe real estate pharmaceuticals, I could never quite remember, and who had a specific vision for her life that didn't have much room at the edges. I want to be careful with Simone because cartoon is easy, and easy isn't true. She wasn't mean to me, not exactly, not in the early years. She was just managed. Precise. The way a house can be beautiful without being warm. She called me by my first name from the beginning without asking if that was all right, not with cruelty but with assumption, and that assumption was a kind of shorthand for how she'd always see me. Helen. The mother, a category, not a person. I fit somewhere in her mental filing system between obligatory and sweet, and I knew it, and I mostly made my peace with it because Arthur was happy and Simone was competent and the grandchildren were coming, eventually. Except they weren't coming. Not easily. That's the part of the story I want to be careful with because it belongs to them, not me. 4 years of trying and not getting there. 2 losses early on that I knew about and cried over alone in my kitchen so no one would feel they had to comfort me when they were the ones hurting. And then finally, Simone pregnant, Simone glowing, Simone with a nursery scheme pulled from a magazine that looked like the inventory of a boutique I couldn't have afforded on Leonard's and my combined salaries. I didn't say a word about the registry. No, I have enough sense for that. What I did was go to my fabric boxes. Leonard had been gone about 8 months by then. I was still in the fog of it, still reaching for him in the night, still making 2 cups of coffee before I remembered. My hands needed something to do. My hands have always been how I think. 22 years as a quilter, first as a hobby, and then, after the children left, as the thing I organized my weeks around, the Tuesday circle at the church. The commission pieces, the baby quilts I'd made for half the women in Mill Haven at $20 a square. My hands knew things my head couldn't always hold on to. So I opened the fabric boxes and I started cutting. Ivory for the base, because that's what I had the most of. Red cotton in 3 shades for the cardinals because of Leonard and his seed feeders and the way he'd whistle at them from the porch like they were old friends. The border would take 3 months at minimum. My knees make the sitting hard now, and my left hand cramps when I push it. There were days I got 6 squares done and days I got 2. I didn't rush it. There was something else to do with the quilt, too. Something I want to tell you about carefully, because it's the thing that changed everything, even though nobody knew about it. Leonard had a plan. My husband was not a complicated man in the way some men are complicated, not moody, not secretive, not grand. He was a foreman at a cable manufacturing plant for 31 years, and he drove a reliable car, and he took his coffee black, and he told the same 4 jokes for our entire marriage without any apparent embarrassment. But Leonard was patient in a way that was almost architectural. He built things slowly, methodically, because he believed in the long game. He believed time rewarded people who were willing to wait. about 3 weeks before he died, when we both knew and were doing that tender, terrible negotiating that couples do when the end is close and there's still so much to say. Leonard asked me to get his old, green strongbox from the shelf in the garage. The one I'd always assumed held tax returns or the title to the car. I brought it to him in the hospital bed we'd set up in the living room. He opened it himself with the little key he wore on his keychain his whole adult life. Inside were savings certificates going back almost 25 years, not fancy investments. Certificates of deposit from 3 different banks, rolled over quietly every few years, with a discipline I had not known he had. He'd started them, the year Arthur turned 15. Figured we'd be grandparents someday, he said. Wanted to have something ready. Figured it ought to be in something safe and boring and automatic, so I wouldn't be tempted to do anything clever with it. I asked him how much. He told me. I sat down on the side of his bed and took his hand. It was $62,000. 25 years of compounded boring patience. $62,000 for a grandchild who at the time Leonard started the account hadn't been born and hadn't even been planned for yet. This is what you need to understand about my husband. He wasn't a man who talked about love very often in the loud way. He was a man who drove the same car for 16 years and put the difference into a savings certificate for a baby who wouldn't arrive for another quarter century. That was his language. That was the whole of what he was. He made me promise to do 2 things. First, don't just hand over a check. Money handed over gets spent on things that feel important and aren't. Put it in something that lasts. Second, and this was so Leonard I almost couldn't stand it, he wanted it found, not announced. He wanted whoever held the quilt to discover it. He wanted the moment to happen. Put it somewhere inside, he said. In the batting or a pocket in the lining. You'll know how to do it. You've been sewing your whole life. And when they open it, let them find it themselves. It'll mean more than if you just tell them what to look for. His eyes were on me with that quiet certainty he'd had his whole life. I want that baby to know their grandfather was thinking about them before they were a thought, he said. So, I built the pocket into the quilt's backing, a flat channel sewn between the batting and the back panel, invisible unless you turned it over and felt along the bottom seam with your fingers. Into it, I slipped the folded documents, the saving certificates in their bank envelopes, and a letter. Leonard had written the letter himself, slowly in the last clear weeks, 2 pages in his big square handwriting. He'd addressed it to his grandchild, whoever that turned out to be, and sealed it with instructions on the envelope. Not until you're 18. Then I want you to sit down somewhere quiet and read this. It was a letter about who he was, about his own grandfather who'd come from nothing in eastern Kentucky, about what he'd learned from working with his hands, about what he hoped the child would know and do and become. It was the most personal thing I had ever read from a man who expressed himself mostly in reliability and jokes about golfers. I tucked the letter behind the savings certificates and stitched the pocket closed. Then I wrapped the quilt in plain brown paper with a white ribbon, and I drove to the baby shower. Simone's shower was at her mother Gloria's house that had a name designed to sound old money, as a suburb of Fulham, but was built in 2004. Gloria had arranged white flowers in cut glass vases, and a catered spread and a photo station with the baby's name spelled out in gold script letters. They'd chosen the name Petra after no one in the family on either side, a name Simone said she'd always loved, which I understood to mean she'd found it on a list somewhere and liked how it photographed. I wore my good blue dress and my pearl earrings. I carried my plain brown box. I found a seat near the back, next to my sister-in-law, June, Leonard's younger sister, who had driven 4 hours from Indiana and who was wearing her own good dress and looked as slightly out of place as I felt. June knew about the quilt. She'd been one of the few people I'd told, partially because I needed to tell someone, and partially because she'd been the one who sat with me in Leonard's kitchen the night after the funeral, enfolded mine, and held my hand while I cried for the first time without anyone watching. June is 71 and says exactly what she thinks, and has never in her life been moved by a label. "Is that it?" she said, nodding at my box. "That's it," I said. She looked at it the way Leonard would have looked at it. Good, she said. That's a good thing you're doing. I held on to that for a while. The gift opening was organized the way these things are organized now, with a table stacked and a photographer circling and an order of operations. Simone opened each gift with the same practiced delight, naming the brand, thanking the giver, holding things up for the photographer. A cashmere swaddle from an organic shop in New York. A sound machine that cost what I used to spend on fabric in a month. A diaper bag in a leather so soft it looked apologetic about existing. I watched Arthur across the room. He was standing near the drink table, looking at his phone more than the room, and every time he looked up, he smiled quickly at whoever caught his eye and then looked back down. He was doing what he always did at Simone's events. He was being present without being there. My box was near the end of the table. When Gloria brought it over to Simone and read the tag, Simone's expression did something practiced. She'd been trained all her life on certain expressions and deployed them well. This one was appreciative with a gentle pre-apology underneath. The face you make when you're about to be grateful for something you have no use for. She opened the brown paper, lifted the quilt out by its corners. The cardinals were bright, even in that overlit room. The ivory was soft in a way you only get with cotton that's been handled. I'd pressed every seam twice. It was the best work my hands had done in years. Oh, Simone said. She said it the way you say it when you see something that isn't what you were hoping for. That gentle oh that closes off a conversation before it can open. She looked up at me with the practiced smile. Did you make this? I did, I said. I was going to say more. I was going to say there's something inside it, sweetheart. Something along the bottom if you feel the seam. I'd practiced the sentence. But Simone was already turning to show it to the photographer, holding it the way you hold something for inspection rather than for warmth. She tilted her head. It's lovely, Helen, she said, in the tone that meant the subject was closed. So sweet. Gloria said, from the heart, and smiled at me with her head tilted, the way people smile at children who've drawn something sincere and strange. And then, because the afternoon was moving and there were more gifts, and because my quilt, with its plain cotton cardinals and its handmade seams, did not fit the flow of what the room was building toward, Simone set it aside. Just set it on the chair beside her, not on the gift table. On the chair beside her, a little apart from everything else, the way you set down something you'll deal with later and probably won't. I waited for the moment when she'd pick it back up, when she'd feel along the bottom seam and her face would change. I'd planned the whole afternoon around that moment. Leonard had asked for it specifically, and I'd built it in with my own hands, and I'd driven 2 hours with it on the passenger seat. The moment didn't come. More gifts were opened. Simone moved on with the bright momentum of a woman with an audience. My quilt sat on the chair and nobody looked at it again. When the afternoon wound down and the plates were cleared and the thank you cards were handed out with the little party favors, I watched one of Simone's friends collect the gifts from the table into boxes for loading into the car. The quilt was still on the chair. Then it wasn't. I didn't see exactly what happened. I saw the friend, a young woman named I didn't catch in jeans and a blazer, moving things efficiently, and I saw the quilt moved with them, boxed up with the tissue paper and the ribbons, folded quickly without looking at it. That night I drove home to Millhaven in the dark and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I told myself it was fine, that Simone would unpack everything and she'd feel the pocket when she shook the quilt out, or Arthur would, or someone folding it would run their hand along the bottom seam and feel the thickness and open it up. I told myself Leonard's plan was still in motion. I told myself to be patient. I told myself that for 6 weeks. And then Arthur called me on a Wednesday evening and I could hear in his voice before he said a word that something had happened. Not grief, not emergency. The particular register of a man who'd learned something that had rearranged the room. Mom, he said, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest. Of course, I said. The quilt you made for Petra. He stopped. Did you put something in it? My heart went very still. What do you mean? I asked carefully. I mean, he exhaled. June called me today. Of course, she had. June had held out 6 weeks. She'd waited and watched and done what women like June do when they've agreed not to interfere, waited exactly as long as they could stand it, and then called my son on a Wednesday. She told him, he said. She told me with what was inside the quilt, the savings certificates. Dad's letter. His voice had changed while he was saying it, flatter, and then fuller, and then something in the word Dad that he had to stop around. Arthur, I said. Where is the quilt? Silence. Arthur, where is it? I don't know, he said. Mom, I don't know. Simone boxed everything up after the shower, and I haven't been through the boxes. There were so many boxes. Mom. He said it the way children say it, when they need the word to mean something larger than a name. I'll be there tomorrow, I said. I'm coming in the morning. What I didn't know yet, what Arthur didn't know, what none of us knew that Wednesday night, was where exactly the quilt had gone. We found out Thursday when we went through the nursery boxes together, Arthur and I, pulling out the cashmere swaddle and the leather diaper bag and the organic cotton onesies in their crackling tissue. And at the end, when the boxes were empty, there was no ivory quilt with red cardinals. Arthur called Simone. She came home at noon. She stood in the door of the nursery, and I watched her face do the math. I thought you kept everything, Arthur said, from the shower. I did, she said. And then, looking at the empty boxes, I returned a few things we got doubles of. He went quiet for a moment. Which things? She was quiet for longer than the question needed. The handmade items, she said finally. I donated a few of the handmade items to the Goodwill on Stelzer. I thought, she looked at me, and then away. I thought Helen would understand. We already had so much, and a used quilt seemed. She didn't finish the sentence. That's not a used quilt, Arthur said in a voice I hadn't heard from him before. His father's voice, actually. Leonard's voice when the matter was settled. That's your daughter's inheritance. The word inheritance landed in the room like something solid. I want to tell you what I did not do in that moment, because this is the part people always want to know about. I did not raise my voice. I did not tell Simone what I thought of her, though I had a complete and detailed set of thoughts available. I did not cry, though the crying was very close, closer than I'd have liked. I picked up my purse. I'll go to the Goodwills, I said. It was 3 miles away. I drove it in 7 minutes and pulled into the parking lot and went straight to the bedding section, with my heart pounding, in a way I tried to sound casual about to myself and failed completely. The quilt was on a rack between a fleece blanket with the sports team logo and a pink comforter with butterflies. Someone had priced it at $4. I took it off the rack and held it for a moment in the fluorescent light of the Goodwill on Stelzer Road and thought about my husband, buying savings certificates at the bank 25 years ago, with the same quiet certainty he brought to everything he did. Thought about him in the hospital bed, writing a letter to a granddaughter he wouldn't meet, in his big square handwriting, stopping to breathe. $62,000, and the last letter Leonard Philip Wooten would ever write, priced at $4 on a rack in Columbus, Ohio. I took it to the register and paid and put it in my car and sat with my hands on the wheel. Then I called Arthur. I have it, I said. The sound he made was not quite words. I have it, sweetheart. It's safe. He said, I'm sorry. And then he said it again. And then a third time. In that way, that means the sorry is for more than one thing. I know, I said. I know you are. What followed wasn't simple, and I won't pretend it was. The conversation Arthur and Simone had that night, I wasn't there for, but I got enough of it from both sides to understand it from 2 angles, which is the only way I know how to look at any dispute that matters. Arthur's version, he was calm and direct and said things he'd been holding back for years, which came out in a particular order that surprised them both. Simone's version, she'd been blindsided. She hadn't known. She'd thought it was just a quilt. How could she have known there was anything inside it? Why hadn't Helen said something? It wasn't fair. Both versions were true in the way that 2 people looking at the same door from different sides can both accurately describe its color. What I noticed was that Simone's version never included the words I'm sorry without also including a reason why the sorry wasn't entirely hers. That's a specific kind of sorry. I've been alive 73 years and I know the difference. I spent a week thinking, and then I called the bank. I'd already known this would be complicated. The savings certificates were in Leonard's name, and settling them was part of the estate process I'd been working through with a woman at the bank named Carol, who had a kind and phone manner and a very organized desk. When I told Carol what had happened and what I wanted to do now, she was thoughtful and quiet, and then she gave me the name of a trust attorney in town. His name was Vincent, and he had offices on the square above the old jewelry store, and he spent 45 minutes with me one Tuesday morning without once making me feel foolish or old. When I explained what Leonard had intended and what had happened and what I wanted to happen now, he looked at his notepad for a moment. So the original intent was a gift to the grandchild directly, he said. To Petra, yes, I said. Not to her parents, specifically to her. He wrote something down. We can structure that cleanly, he said. An education and wellness trust for Petra's benefit, with an independent trustee, disbursable for education, medical needs, or on her 21st birthday, her choice. Not accessible to either parent. Not accessible to either parent, I said. That costs him something, he said, meaning Arthur. I want you to understand that. It's a consequence that extends to your son as well. I know, I said. Leonard saved that money for his grandchild, not for the people who would have made decisions about a quilt that was priced at $4. Vincent looked at me for a moment with something that wasn't quite a smile. All right, he said, let's build it right. The trust took 3 weeks to formalize. $62,000 locked for Petra, education, medical, or distributed at 21 by her own choice. An independent trustee. Completely sealed from anyone else's access. The savings certificates transferred and the trust funded, and a letter from Leonard included as a document in the trust, to be unsealed and given to Petra on her 18th birthday, exactly as he'd intended. And the quilt, clean now, the faint cardboard smell of the Goodwill rack washed out in a gentle cycle, sat on the chair in my bedroom and waited. I didn't give it back immediately. I want to be honest about that. I'm not a vindictive woman, but I'm also not an unconditionally generous one, and the quilt had come too close to $4 on a rack to be handed back without a conversation. The conversation happened on a Sunday in November. My house, my kitchen table, the same table where I'd cut the fabric squares for the cardinal's border. Arthur came alone first. He sat down and I made coffee, and he wrapped his hands around his mug the way his father always had, and looked at the table for a long moment. I know what you think of me, he said. I don't think badly of you, I said. I think you've been choosing the easy thing for a long time, and it's become a habit so deep you don't always recognize it as a choice anymore. He nodded slowly. I should have been paying attention, he said. At the shower. I should have asked. You should have, I said, not unkindly. But you didn't, and here we are. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you need me to do? I need you to bring Simone over, I said. And I need to give you both some information in person. And then I need you to be the kind of father to Petra that your father was to you, which means the long game, not the easy one. He came back an hour later with Simone. Simone was careful, which is Simone at her most open. She sat straight and held her coffee with both hands and looked at me the way someone looks when they've been told to expect something they're not sure how to receive. I told them everything. About the pocket. About the savings certificates. About Leonard starting the account when Arthur was 15, buying them quietly and letting time work. About $62,000 that had sat in a Goodwill for however many days before I found it. I watched Simone's face while I talked. The careful composure did something complicated in the middle of it. When I said $62,000, a small sound came out of her that she stopped immediately, a short, involuntary, swallowed sound. I kept my voice even. I'm not telling you this to punish you, I said. I'm telling you because you need to understand what was in your hands, not because it was valuable, though it was. Because of where it came from. My husband spent 25 years building something quietly for a person who didn't exist yet. He didn't talk about it. He didn't ask for credit. He just did it the way he did everything, without needing anyone to watch. I touched the quilt, which I'd brought to the table. This was how he wanted to give it. Hidden inside something I made by hand. Not because he was tricky, but because he understood that money in an envelope gets spent on whatever feels urgent at the time. He wanted it to mean something before she touched it. Simone looked at the quilt. She said, "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. A pause. "I should have looked," she said. "I should have asked what was in it before you donated it," I said, gently and directly, because I believe in finishing sentences. Her jaw moved. "Before I donated it." There was no blame left in my voice by then. The blame had burned through in the car outside the Goodwill, and I'd said what I needed to say to no one in particular and let it go. What I felt now was something closer to tired, and something else underneath that was sadder, which was that I understood Simone better than she probably wanted to be understood. She'd been raised by a woman who moved through the world, valuing things by their signals, their surfaces, their visible proof of worth. She'd been taught that handmade meant well-meaning but lesser. She hadn't been taught how to look underneath. That wasn't cruelty. It was a hole in her education. The cruelty was mine to grieve for Leonard, not to inflict on her. "The money is in a trust," I said. "For Petra. Only for Petra. Education, medical, or when she turns 21 she can decide. It cannot be touched by her parents, by me, by anyone except Petra herself. That's what Leonard intended, and that's what I've done." Simone nodded once, tight. "I want to tell you what he wrote in the letter," I said, because he asked me to read the opening when the family first heard about the gift. He didn't know it would be a day like this, but he wanted me to, and I'm going to. I took the copy I'd made from my cardigan pocket. My hands were steadier than I expected. I read it. "If you're reading this alongside my granddaughter's face," Leonard had written, "then I made it long enough to matter, or I didn't, but either way the plan worked. I've been saving for you since before your dad was grown. Not because I had a lot, but because I was patient. Patience is the only thing I was ever better at than other people. Your grandmother's the one who's good with her hands. I'm just good at waiting. The money is for something that lasts. School, if that's your path. A house, if it comes to that, something solid. But the real thing I want you to know is that someone was thinking about you before you were a thought. That's not nothing. That's everything. Come find me at the Cardinals. Your grandmother knows what I mean. All my love always, Grandpa Lenny." Arthur had his hand over his mouth by the end. Simone was looking at the cardinals on the quilt's board. She reached out very slowly and touched one of them with her fingertip. "He did all of this for her," she said quietly. 25 years, he did all of it," I said. A long silence. "I'm sorry, Helen," she said, and that time, the sorry stood alone. I nodded. "I know. The quilt came home with Petra that evening. I carried it in and laid it over her in the crib myself, and she grabbed the border with one fist, which is what babies do, and looked at me with the serious dark eyes she'd had since she was born. 'Cardinal,' I told her, 'that was your grandpa's bird. He's watching over you.'" She considered this information solemnly and did not offer comment. Simone stood in the door of the nursery. She'd followed me in quietly, and she stood there watching her daughter hold the quilt's edge with both fists. "Will you teach me?" she said. I looked at her. "To quilt," she said. "I'd like to learn, if you'd be willing." I looked at her for a moment in the doorway, this careful, defended, label-taught woman who had almost thrown Leonard's whole heart away and who was asking, in the only language she knew how to use, to learn a different one. "Yes," I said. "Come to my house on Tuesdays. We'll start with something simple." She came. She's been coming 3 months now. She made Petra a small rectangular wall hanging in pale yellow and made every mistake a beginner makes. Cut the binding crooked, misjudged the seam allowance, pressed a crease in the wrong direction, and didn't catch it until the whole piece was assembled. She held it up the first time she finished a block with the uncertain look of a woman unaccustomed to making things that don't come out perfect on the first try. "It's lopsided," she said. "It is," I agreed. "Is that bad?" I handed it back to her. "That's how you know a person made it," I said. She looked at it differently after that. "Arthur is different too, in the way that slow changes are different. You notice them backwards, realize they've been happening for a while before you caught on. He stops now when I'm talking, fully stops, and puts down whatever was in his hands. He asks about Leonard. He started putting out bird seed behind the house, not for any particular reason he's mentioned, just because the cardinals come. He told me last month that he and Simone are going to tell Petra about the trust when she's old enough to understand it, that they're going to explain that it comes from her grandfather, who thought about her before she was born. And the letter? I asked. He'll read it to her when she's 18, he said, the way Dad wanted. Just like Leonard planned, I said. Just like Leonard planned. My hands are not good every morning. Some days they win before I've had my first cup of coffee, and I have to run them under hot water and wait for the stiffness to soften before I can do anything useful. But I am working on something new, slowly, a few squares at a time, on the days when the morning cooperates. It's a quilt for Petra. When she's older. The fabric I've chosen is yellow and deep red. Her colors I've decided, cardinal and sunlight, because some decisions a grandmother gets to make on her own. And in the corner, when it's done, I'll put the same initials I put in every piece I've made for this family. LPW. In the smallest stitching I can still manage, so she'll know where to look. That's the whole of it, really. One quilt, one Goodwill rack, one dead man's patient 25 years, all of it waiting to be found by the right hands at the right time. Leonard always said, time pays interest on patience. I spent 73 years learning to believe him. That's what we do. The women who sew things into quilts and stitch initials in corners and build pockets into lining where no one thinks to look. We put love somewhere it will keep, and we trust it to outlast everything that tried to get rid of it. We wait.